The errors will only continue until they're fixed. The fixing of errors must happen soon, otherwise morale will not improve. And there's a question, of course, about current rules that Games Workshop has fixed. Did Games Workshop fix the rules with changes because they saw my videos or someone else's, or because anyone who looked at the rules a second time would notice problems? This is a question for the ages. Will I be nicer to Games Workshop if they have fixed the errors? My intention with the errors videos that continue was to have some fun laughing with you about rules mistakes, but also to show just how unfinished these rules are before Games Workshop expected you to pay for them and start playing with them. I am still unhappy that the core rules were never complete core rules, and that there are way more errors than last edition, which had a full reset instead of a few updates being required. So Games Workshop has failed my most basic of expectations for a new edition. Can they claw back some consolation points? Maybe. I am aware of a marketing tactic that is used. If something works perfectly, then it is unremarkable, but if something looks really bad and then gets fixed, that is something you remember far more favorably. Remember Sonic from the Sonic the Movie trailer? I'm not saying Games Workshop planned to be bad with the intention of fixing it later to make us like them. Oh no, I'm saying don't be over-complimentary of a games company that didn't get the rules right and is rushing that back with a cut, measure, and check and panic and then cut again approach. Every time I play 40k, I come up against some new interaction that doesn't work quite right in the new rules. So this look at the errors of 11th edition is a good opportunity to also tell you about the rules that have changed that you may have missed because they were only changed on the app and I maybe didn't cover them in my videos about the faction changes to the armies that we play. Or maybe you think you heard about the change in some tournament errata or other, and that is not the official rules, so it isn't a rules fix. Every tournament has their own set of rules. Those can and often do conflict with the Games Workshop core rules. Tell me more fixes that are needed for the next balance patch in the comments below, and if they aren't covered in the August balance patch, maybe they'll come up in the September balance patch. Otherwise, they're not getting fixed until at least the December balance patch. Of course, now you have to watch the video to check I didn't mention the thing that you want to type. Otherwise, you would look silly. Deadly Demise is still a problem. I've made a whole video about it, as it is a very interesting and specific interaction. The unit ability says it applies to all models in the unit. This is the same as any other ability that says something like, all models in the unit get sustained hits. It doesn't apply to just the model that has the ability, it applies to all models in the unit because it says it applies to all models in the unit. So Junith, Erewhita, and any sisters she is with, every one of those sisters has Deadly Demise. It's more noticeable on Orcs with a Weird Boy where it's Deadly Demise D3 and they can join very big squads of boys. That can chain reaction, pop and blow up some more boys, it blows up some more boys, and you can just throw them against an enemy unit, and then that can do a lot of mortal wounds, regardless of what the Orcs combat ability will do. Precision continues to be an odd ability. You only get to push one character to the front of the allocation group, regardless of how many characters are in the unit. Like if you have a Primus and a Biophagus in the enemy unit, you can shoot one of them, but not the other. You do not get precision against all characters, just one allocation group worth of characters. Only one model with a precision weapon needs to be able to see the character, then all precision weapons of the same type attacking at the same time can be allocated against that character model. That doesn't sound quite right, but that's how the rule is at the moment. The Psychic rule lets you ignore modifiers to your weapon skill, your ballistic skill, and to hit rolls, which means that there are several abilities in the game that will not affect psychic attacks or units that only use psychic weapons. The damage status effect that several units get when they're so hurt that they become -1 to their hit rolls. If you are using a psychic weapon, you get to ignore that rule. The rule has no reason to exist. Until it's changed to say this affects you even if you have psychic weapons, then Magnus and Kairos Fate Weaver are never going to end up being, as we say, bracketed. Their attacks are not going to get worse regardless of how many wounds they have. Some rules that refer to things from 10th edition have been changed. We'll get onto them in a fixing section later on in the video, but stuff like the reinforcement step and charge bonus, they come up in several stratagems, but they don't have an explanation in 11th edition as to what they are. The Dark Network for the Genestealer cult happens in the reinforcement step. Are we to assume, and we are currently assuming that is any time in the movement phase, but it's referring to a step that isn't there anymore? It can cause confusion. And rather than saying when an enemy unit is set up from reserves, it should say when an enemy unit makes an ingress move. I was glad that the ingress move was created, because makes a normal move but is set up from reserve, so you count as making a normal move but you haven't made a normal move for the purpose of any rules, was very confusing as a 10th edition way of explaining what was happening. But it only works properly if all of the rest of the rules are updated to match that this is an ingress move that's happening, not a setup from reserves that is a normal move that isn't a normal move. And from the charge bonus in 10th edition was when you charged, you got to fight first. That is now part of making a charge move in 11th edition. When you do heroic intervention, you have made a charge move, you can fight first. But a stratagem like the ensnaring trap for the Imperial agents, it says you don't get the charge bonus. Are we meant to assume then that that unit does not get fight first because that's the wording from 10th edition, or do we be sensible and not try and use rules from a different edition to try and make the current edition work? At the very least, I think that these words should be removed, or you put in an FAQ, ideally in a PDF, not the app, to explain what the charge bonus refers to. Otherwise, as it stands, this stratagem is a cheap heroic intervention. It's like the 2 command point version of heroic intervention, but you can do it for 1 command point. I would like to see stratagems like this tidied up. In 10th edition, there was a rule about command points. You could only generate 1 command point per battle round. In the most recent patches, Games Workshop has gone through all of the different tournament packs and said, okay, in doubles, maximum of 1 command point. Then in the next patch, okay, regular singles events and teams event, maximum of 1 command point can be gained per player per battle round, not including the one you get in your command phase. One's from like Junith Erawita or from discarding a secondary mission. It isn't in the core rules. It's not in the app outside of these event packs. So if you're playing a normal game that isn't a tournament game, which are only played at tournaments, you can generate more and more command points than just the 1. If both players have a Coteas, and one of them, say, throws away a secondary mission at the end of their turn, instead of scoring it, they generate a command point. On a 2+, the opposing player's Coteas generates a command point, which means that your Coteas can generate a command point in 2+. You could play with 1 million command points. That could be fun, and that is how the rules are for everyone's games outside of tournaments. Go to ground is a slightly confusing rule. I'm not going to get into it right now. There's so many rules that are like other rules that I'm going to have to explain in a separate video because they're different rules and so they're affected by different abilities. But the go to ground rule says you have to be within a terrain feature. It should say within a terrain area. You are only hidden if you are part tree or have replaced your face with the concrete from a wall. That doesn't sound right. Area terrain and terrain features are different things. Area terrain is the squarish thing you put on the board. The terrain feature is the wall or the barricade or the tree that you put onto the terrain area. And just phase through the wall, why not? It's fine, do it. Phase through the wall, yeah, that's the only way you can be hidden. This is some Conflict 47 stuff going on right now. Many stratagems in the game refer to the ability to advance a transport and then your units can still disembark. Carry forth the faithful. Unfortunately, the only way you can disembark from a transport that advanced is to use the combat disembark. The transport wasn't stationary, so you can't use this kind of disembark. The transport didn't normal move, so you can't use this kind of disembark, which means you have to use the combat disembark. The unit inside is battle shocked and may take some mortal wounds as they're thrown from the speeding vehicle, and you take your hazardous tests. We need to have the stratagems fixed up so that they work properly. The Tacoma FAQ had a fix for this. This has not been in the Games Workshop rules update. We're talking about the core rules, but the Dominatus deck is not immune to errors. One of the missions has the wrong symbol on it, so unless you read the fine print, you might pick a mission your alliance shouldn't be playing for the final game. When is the final game? The deck says you play 2 games in each phase, but 1 in the last stage, And also, after playing that 5th game, you get the location, potentially some extra cards to determine overall victory, and then it advises you to prepare for the final climactic fight, which you should have just completed because there's only one game in Stage 3. That's confusing. Combat Patrol is a whole new game mode that's now been added to the app, very late after the release of the main rules, but the only way to play it and see what your mission is, your primary mission, is to start playing the game through the War Journal. That's not a good system. I would like to be able to see my mission before I start playing the game. I will have more to say on Combat Patrol before the end of the month. That and some more rules videos are a reason to subscribe to the channel. Yes, we do sister stuff and Genestealer Cult stuff and Deathwatch stuff and Agent stuff. I also talk about the rules and why they're not good, why they need to be improved and fixed and whatnot. So let's get into some army specifics. The Space Marines have a character called Ferran Arios. Don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. He's an Ultramarine, but he doesn't have the Ultramarines chapter, so any Space Marine chapter can use him in their army. The Storm Wolf is an aircraft, even though it has movement of 14 instead of movement 20 plus. It also has the hover rule, so it's currently both, which doesn't work. You're either an aircraft or you hover. You can't be a hovering aircraft. Hover lets you ignore the penalty from taking to the skies. That doesn't matter if you don't move. Aircraft arrive, shoot, then leave at the end of the opponent's turn. They don't actually move. The Tau Manta also has this problem. Iron Father Feroz says he can join Eradicator squads. The new Eradicator squad with Heavy Bolters have the Eradicator keyword, and the Eradicator with Heavy Bolter keyword. He should be able to join them on the app, but he's not able to join them on the app. The Deathwatch did not get their faction pack updated in the last balance patch. There is a missing FAQ that was there in 10th edition and is not there in 11th edition. There was a rule to say the Mission Tactics rule, which is an army ability that every Deathwatch unit has in the Deathwatch faction pack, is only meant to apply when you play the Black Spear Task Force. As it is an army rule, you get it all of the time. Games Workshop may choose not to fix this in the August balance patch because the Space Marine Codex should be coming out at the end of September, and then maybe each sub-faction will have their own army rule instead of Oath of Moment. Mission Tactics for the Deathwatch as their army rule would work, but then we would need a new detachment rule for the Black Spear Task Force. For now, the app lets you see the rule, you can use the rule, and you'll have to decide between you and your opponent if the Deathwatch functionally get an extra detachment rule, or if they don't. The Blood Angels are not faring well with a lack of updates to the Sanguinor. He has a problem. When he does his Miraculous Savior ability and specifically arrives via an ingress move, that's in the opponent's charge phase. So he'll do his fighting stuff, but rules as written he is then not allowed to move until the start of your next charge phase. The ingress move, rule 20.04, states that anything that arrives via an ingress move, unless otherwise stated, until the start of the next charge phase, your unit is not eligible to make any other type of move. Therefore, as you arrived at the start of your opponent's charge phase, you must wait until the start of your own charge phase before you can move. It seems unusual, and his fight first doesn't let him fight first, because the opposing charging unit can be picked first. But assuming he survives, assuming he gets through the combat, in the Blood Angel player's next turn, he can't be moved in the movement phase. If there's nothing around for him to charge, he's not going to charge in the charge phase. He's going to stay there and get fly swatted away in the enemy turn, before he could do anything else. The basic Space Marine Apothecary has an ability that means that when their bodyguard is destroyed, so everyone except them and any other characters, on a 2+ you get a command point. But the Apothecary can also return a model, bringing back the bodyguard. So you could gain a command point, then in your command phase, bring back a bodyguard model, then when that bodyguard is killed again, roll a 2+, and you get another command point. This will probably be happening in different battle rounds as well. So even if there's a rule that stops you from getting more than one command point per battle round, you can still generate many command points from this. Again, Games Workshop might not do anything to this and wait until the Codex. Then the Codex will be released with a massive FAQ of error fixes at the same time, so you won't be able to trust what is written in the Space Marine Codex. The Corvus Blackstar for the Deathwatch has been given the frame keyword. That is if you play Space Marine Deathwatch. If you play Imperial Agents Deathwatch, it does not have the frame keyword. No agent vehicle had it in June 2026, 3 of them got it in July 2026, but the Black Star was not among them. So depending on which army you are playing your Deathwatch with, your Black Star will have different rules for where you measure from. Is it any part of the model, or is it just the base? On the Chaos side, the Thousand Suns version of Kairos Fateweaver has the ability to increase command point costs, but that affects all units within 12 inches and applies each time an enemy unit tries to use a stratagem. It isn't the same in the Chaos Demons version. That is only one time you increase the command point cost. Is this intentional that the two are different? But surely not. No. Because like all of the other increased command point costs were changed to affect one particular stratagem. This should be changed. The Death Guard continue to have no support characters. It seems like an oversight. They retain their rule from last edition that says they split on death and become a separate unit from their bodyguard, which shouldn't apply because Rule 19.01.01 says to ignore that wording. I'm fine with a lone tallyman sitting around. That's just an easy target for my Exorcist. The Reeve Captain and the Red Corsair Raiders still have their base sizes the wrong way around. If people are sticklers for base size, this wording is the official version, not what comes in the box. Though as part of a tournament pack, this is only meant to apply at tournaments. The Emperor's Children still cannot use Horus Heresy units. Their codex came out after the 10th edition index, so they were previously part of Heretic Astartes, and were covered initially, but once they got their own codex, it does not apply anymore. There is no bullet point to say Emperor's Children can also use these, and there should be a bullet point to say the Emperor's Children can use these. They can use Chaos Titans. I wonder if that will come up for me at any point. The Tyranids have a couple of interesting errors. There's a new mistake in the last balance patch where the Rupture Cannon has AP 1 instead of AP -4. Bit of a power difference. And the Venom Thrope had a funny typo. It said units within 6 foot instead of 6 inches are affected. One too few apostrophes there. So Tyranid units within 6 inches were in range, as were Tyranid units within 6 inches of the board edge on a nearby table. They would also get stealth. If they were friendly. That should be fixed soon. The Gene Stealer cult still needs some little bit of help, especially around the Brood Brothers Auxilia. The Suppress and Overwhelm stratagem lasts for the turn to stop enemies firing Overwatch. You start using it in the shooting phase after the enemy had the chance to fire Overwatch. There is no time they could fire Overwatch. If it said snap shooting, then it would apply possibly to some abilities, but as it is, it doesn't. At least the Votan Berserks will stop the enemy firing Overwatch next turn because that lasts until the player's next shooting phase. So you target the enemy unit that has all flamers. Stop them firing Overwatch. That can still work. Gene Stealer cult, not so much. 9 Jackal Bikers is an option for the Gene Stealer cult. It isn't some points that was specially set up to stop a weird tournament tactic. I talked to people because I couldn't see any possible benefit, and there truly is no benefit to having a more expensive unit without a wolf quad. Take 5 or take 10. You would never take 9. This is some absurd error and should go away. And finally, unaligned units are missing entirely. No PDF for them, nothing on the app. No Amble, no Zote. They need to have their rules, they're still sold as models. Now there were many things that were fixed in the last balance patch, like Games Workshop is slowly regaining ground that they should never have lost in the first place. So grenades and tank shock. There is an FAQ to say when it says grenades, it means explosives. When it says tank shock, it means crushing impact. I wish Games Workshop would change the unit entries to say that, especially on the app so new players don't have to search the app to find out what grenades is, and hopefully they get the right answer. Typing in grenades does not necessarily bring up this FAQ. Playing 40k right now takes a lot of time. 4 hours is the current average for 2,000 points. And then tournaments try and squish that down to 2 hours 45. but it's things like this that add to the average player's game length. What does this do? Where do I find it? I can't find it. I'll have to look it up online. Why would I have an ability I can't use? They should change the unit entries. The Orc Bully Boys had a stratagem called Crushing Impact, so there were 2 versions of Crushing Impact, same name. Any unit that could use Crushing Impact could, I suppose, pick either version of Crushing Impact if you had the Bully Boys detachment. Now it's been changed to Crushing Impact. I don't know exactly how that will translate into other languages. Maybe they'll just keep it as Crushing and say, okay, this is your weird English version. But in the Chorus of Condemnation, when you spot an enemy unit with your jump pack units, they are condemned. If you're playing one of the Purge the Foe missions, you target enemies that are condemned, and you get victory points for killing them. I think we know that they're not the same condemned, but it might be worth changing it just in case. After all, there's multiple ways to get the benefit of cover, and that still applies the benefit of cover. If there's multiple ways to condemn a unit, they are condemned for both aspects of the rule. Well, it's spotted or sighted or something like that. That would work better for the Chorus of Condemnation. Desperate Escape was another phrase that existed in 10th edition, but doesn't really do anything in 11th edition. There is no Desperate Escape test. But we still have a lot of abilities that say you fail a Desperate Escape test on a 2 instead of a 1, or if you're battle shocked, your Desperate Escape test is worse, something like that. There's now an FAQ to explain what a Desperate Escape test is within 11th edition. It's referring to modifying the hazard roll, meaning that you could fail on a 1, a 2, or a 3. Or if something forces a Desperate Escape test, they take a Battle Shock test, and they make a hazard roll for each model in their unit. Abilities that refer to objective markers could get somewhat contentious because there are rules in 11th edition to say this is an objective marker, it's a 40mm circle that you measure 3 inches from. But that's not an objective area terrain that is an objective. Well, now there's an FAQ to say objective areas and objective markers are the same for rules purposes. So yes, you can use Defenders of the Faith or a Plan Generations in the Making on an objective area, and it works just the same as on an objective marker. You can generate your miracle dice and your command points from objective areas. Most people knew that they were the same thing. Some people were like, technically none of these abilities work. Now they work. There was a problem with scoring, which mainly came up in the app, but unfortunately the app was the way you scored your game. Anything scored at the end of the game was lumped in with Battle Round 5. So if you got an extra 5 points at the end of the game, you couldn't gain 15 points in Battle Round 5, then an extra 5. The end of game stuff was going to be discarded. Maximum of 15 victory points per battle round. Now they've been put separate on the app, so it is easy to score like 25 primary victory points in the final battle round and then the end of the game. Goes back to my advice, if you kill the enemy, they can't score. It doesn't matter how well they scored at the start of the game, you will have like 2 turns to score everything. Keywords have got a little bit of a note to say, okay, if you have a keyword within a name, that isn't a keyword. And your own name is a keyword, even though it's not going to be listed as a keyword. If you know that this is an FAQ rule, then it's useful. If you didn't know that, it's not going to make things easy for people. So the Big Mech Dakka rig should have that as a keyword. You assume that Big Mech Dakka rig is there as a keyword, even though it's not listed as a keyword. It has the Big Mech keyword, which applies for any stratagems or detachment rules triggering from Big Mech, but even though the word mech is in its name, it is not a mech. Keywords within the name don't count as keywords. This is why Redemptor Dreadnought needs to also be marked as Dreadnought. Having Dreadnought in the name doesn't count. Commissar Graves and Commissar Yarrick are not commissars for the purpose of detachments or stratagems or any other rules. They would have to be Commissar, Commissar Graves. That's the only way they would be considered commissars. So in the Abhuman Auxiliaries detachment, Yarrick and Graves cannot issue an order to a friendly Abhuman unit. They do not have that ability. That will get confusing at some point. Previously, when you deployed your army, officially in 11th edition, transports could be empty. In 10th edition, there was a rule to stop dedicated transports being empty. They would explode at the start of the game, but not deadly demise explode. Just be removed as casualties. They wouldn't count. The idea was it stops you taking a lot of cheap boxes, filling the board with boxes, and being able to like block the enemy movement with some big boxes. Now, once again, like in 10th edition, you need to have something inside the transports, otherwise they will explode before the game starts. Games Workshop is catching up to where they were 3 and a bit years ago. If you're a big aircraft, you can now be set up on the table and you'll work. Your rules will work, you'll be able to be there, you can still then shoot, and then like an aircraft, leave the board. You're not limited to 6 inches, you put yourself on the table as much as you can, and then you do your normal aircraft things. Lord of Deceit auras / Agents of Vect, as some older players may know it and other people that are newer may have started calling it. Any kind of ability that says you can increase the cost of enemy command points. That only triggers once per turn to increase the command point cost of a stratagem, in most cases. So the question was, if an opponent activates a 1 command point stratagem while in range, what happens? Is the command point spent? Does the stratagem still work? If neither happens, is the single use of the aura spent? The Tacoma FAQ explained it. Games Workshop core rules now also explain. If the opponent has the necessary command points to pay the increased cost, they have to pay the increased cost. They wanted to use explosives 1 command point, it now costs 2 command points, they have 2 command points. They must spend 2 command points. This is why you tell people, hey, I have this thing. If you're trying to use that stratagem, before you do, just know I can double its cost. Rather than saying, haha, gotcha, now you can't use any more stratagems, you got no more command points. Ooh, I got you good. Yeah, this is how normal people play. And it's not. But if the enemy had 1 command point, and only 1 command point, and they want to use a stratagem that was 1 command point, if you increase the cost of that to 2 command points, no command points are spent, but the stratagem isn't resolved, but it still counts as having been used there. So if you try and use grenades, so if you try and use explosives, and you're like, okay, yes, I will increase the cost of that, your opponent can't go, okay, well, I didn't spend my command point there, but I'll use grenades, but I'll use the explosive stratagem somewhere else. It's not allowed, it still counts as having been used this phase. And lastly, Take to the Skies and Heavy. This is more of an FAQ than a rules change. You can use Heavy and Take to the Skies. As I explained it, you don't move 2 inches when you Take to the Skies, your maximum move characteristic is reduced by 2. If there was a vehicle that could go 12 inches, and it can fly, it could take to the skies over an intervening wall, and it can have Heavy because it hasn't moved more than 3 inches out of a possible 10 inches. So there have been some changes, but the game is not quite fully fixed and ready to play. You can play it, but you're going to come up against some problems somewhere that will hopefully not be problems later on, and then we'll be like, well, why was this ever a problem? What was happening here? This was weird. I feel like I've been playing the official way, but also playing it wrong. The August balance patch is coming soon. Expect more mission deck changes to help maybe disruption, or more likely bring down priority asset scoring potential. This is a physical product that Games Workshop has sold, as have their third-party stockists. They generally remain untouched for a while so that they can be sold. Last edition, there were complaints from many of their stockists saying, hey, I don't want to take a card deck or index card deck that is outdated and incorrect as a set of rules. People won't buy them if they know they're wrong. So Games Workshop gives more grace before changing it. You see how last month Games Workshop toned down the number of Purge players by changing the disposition of any 1 detachment point detachments that were Purge. This month I expect the grace period has ended and that the card deck you bought or got in the Armageddon set will need adhesive notes or changes made in marker pen. Anticipate that this month or next month. Also, hopefully Games Workshop will start making headway on the other issues I mentioned in this video before looking deeper at game balance in preparation for the Orc Codex. I'm getting 9th edition flashbacks. More rule stacking, a lot of bloat like all of the Space Marine detachments available, horrific looking new units in a new codex, though that will depend on the points of the Orc units. That is the real metric that decides the power of a unit. So Games Workshop has more fixes to do. If you want to see the changes and fixes for specific factions, then you can see what Games Workshop has done to them, especially to their army rules. My darlings and viewers, have a great day of 40k.